Thank you for joining me for session 2 of Public Art 101. Today we're going to explore the public art process. One of the great things about working in public art and working with artists is that it's always different. It's exciting, it's new. Artists are literally taking ideas and bringing them to reality in new ways every single day. What that means is we need a process that allows artists the room for that creativity, where they can explore and try new things and develop new ideas and technologies that create these projects. But we need to do it in a way that ensures that there are steps in the process, checkpoints, and clear ways of working that will ensure the success of that project as a whole. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The public art process flow, all of those high-level steps and touch points that you're going to go through in your public art process, they're going to help you ensure the success of your project. So what you're looking at here is called a process map. So most process flows have a 5-step process. It's always very similar. Some of the steps move from area to area, but the idea is always the same. These 5 steps are what are going to lead you to success. The first step, of course, is to identify your project. This is where you say, I have an idea that something could go here. This is where we want an art project to exist in our community. How can we make that happen? The next step then is to assess and to select. So that would be where you figure out how much money you have. What resources can you apply to supporting this, which might include a project manager to assist the artist in the development of the project. It's going to include your selection committee, any panels that are going to support the project, and your overall project team. Those are the people who are going to oversee the success of the project along the way. With that assessment team, that's where you're going to choose how you select your artists. Is that going to be an open call, or are you going to direct select an artist through invitation? Or are you going to look for somebody from your community? All of those things are going to be done in that phase of the project. So then the next step is to plan and design your project. This is also really fun. This is where you have all the parameters in place. So you have your project plan, everything is ready to go, your artist is selected, and they start to go into the community. Maybe they're doing some community engagement, they're doing some research, they're starting to design their concept for the community and the way that art is going to exist in the community. That concept is their exciting new idea that's just for you. Once the concept has been created, that's when you move into the implementation phase. But really what we're looking for is how you make that concept a reality. So depending on whether your artwork is 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, whether it needs installation into the ground, whether there's electrical, if there's glass, if it's an external fabricator, this is where you start to actually develop the project and make it real. It might be one phase, but it's often the longest and the most complicated phase of any art project. Once the project has been implemented, you get to the celebration and evaluation step of your process. This is where you get to celebrate the existence of that artwork, bring the community out so that they know, share through communications, making sure everyone knows the story of how that project came about, as well as evaluate the process, how those steps worked, what you might change for next time, so that when you do your next public art project, you can do it even better. So step 1 is just the identification of your project. It is literally your idea. This is where you're going to determine how you're going to get some money to make this happen, because we all need to have enough money to support the development of the project and the vision that we have. You're also going to decide who's going to lead your project. And that requires a couple of things. We need a project manager who's going to oversee and supervise the project through every step and every phase, making sure that all of those check boxes are ticked. And then you need a project team, which would be a larger group of interested parties who are going to support the development of the project, who have key checkpoints along the way to ensure that the way that you agreed upon moving forward in the project is staying consistent throughout the entire project. One thing to think about at this phase, don't design the project for the artist. So if you're an interested community member, if you're a group that's come together and you're saying, I want artwork here, we're going to bring an artist in to do artwork here, you want to make sure that you let the artist design that artwork. So the criteria that you're creating, the parameters around that are things like where it goes, what materials might be allowed here, what we're trying to celebrate or memorialize within our community. You're looking at more objective criteria that you're going to ask the artist to meet, and then you're going to ask the artist to create something for you within those criteria. What you're looking at here is one of the resource guides that were created by artists for the City of Calgary and for CADA to use, which guide this public art process from a more arts perspective. This particular page is from artist Nicole Wolf's resource guide. So you'll see in her page that it's about the idea. This idea that you want public art within your community, which is why you're here today, learning this process, and how you might work with an artist in order to support them in developing that. So you see that she's put together a team of people here, and they each have a little voice where they're saying, I'll get the permits, I'll find the funding, and how will we find an artist? And that's exactly what you need. You need a group of people who are there to support this idea and to make it happen. So step 2 is where it gets a little bit into the development of the planning of this project. This is important. A lot of people forget that with art, it's subjective. And so you may think that you all agree on something, but really what you have is a slightly different idea of what that might turn out to be. And so the more you can plan up front and create a really clear charter, we often call it, but it's just a project plan, an agreement of ideas or ways of working that's going to lead you toward an outcome that you're looking for. The more that you have that written down and agreed upon by your entire project team at the beginning, the more success you're going to have at the end. So it's an important time to have those conversations up front about what we want to achieve through our art project. How much community engagement do you want? Do you want a temporary project? What if you get a really great artist who just wants to do a performative artwork within your community? Is that enough for you, or do you want a permanent artwork? What does that permanent artwork need to look like? How long does it need to last? Are you saving some money to make sure that it can last as well as possible into the future? Who is going to take care of that artwork after it's been installed? And if anything happens to it, who's responsible for taking it away? A lot of people forget to plan for the end of the life of their artwork at the beginning. And that's a really important part of your process with your planning team, is to understand that the end needs to be planned for from the beginning.
I would like artists to think about their intentions for how long they would like their artwork to live out in the world, what kind of space it's going to be situated in, and how that space, both the people in it and the environment and climate and circumstances of that site, how it will impact the artwork, and think about what you would feel is an acceptable degree of change to that artwork over time, and what you feel you would like to preserve as best as possible in a particular condition, and whether that's possible and what's required to make that possible.
In the planning phase, you want to make sure that you put together a team of representatives who will oversee the project as a whole. This is what we call your project team. Together, you'll build a project plan that outlines all of the specifics of your project and that your project team agrees to upfront. And those include the goals of the project. So if it's a memorial, if it's a celebration, if it's community engagement, what are you looking for in your outcomes? What the budget is, how it's going to be spent, and the timeline for the project. When does it need to get into the ground or onto the wall? You want to include an engagement plan for how you're going to include the public in that process. You want to have a communications plan, how you're going to share the story of this artwork with the community at large. And you want to understand how you're going to select your artist and how you're going to contract them to your organization. This might include things like insurance and who cares for the artwork in the future. Step 3 is where we get the concept and the design. So after an artist has done their research, they might do a community engagement component, actually involve the community in the idea and how they're going to execute it. And then the artist will develop their concept. This is their idea. It usually includes mock-ups, drawings, maybe some computer-generated images. A lot of artists like to do maquettes. It's actually going to show you what they can create within the parameters that you've provided them. So they're going to, in their concept, ensure that they can meet your budget and your timeline that you've laid out for them, that they're meeting all of those goals and objectives through their design, and they're going to give that to your project team for approval. So this is the idea before you invest the money in making it. And the checkpoint is to make sure that that concept meets the needs of the project as a whole before it starts being built.
Part of the process is that discovery. You start with a vague idea, and then that idea, there is a point where it's no longer your idea. It's like its own thing. And then it kind of, there's one where you have to just kind of follow it where it wants to go. And that also means what the material is going to be in the end. That's how it's going to express itself. Yeah, I think for me, that's how the materials or colors, things like that go. It's an idea, and then it just starts to manifest, to become. Yeah.
One very interesting thing is in the way we thinking in the concept and then thinking in the budget. This as I feel like you have this pressure, but we have the idea to just play with that and then thinking a little bit out of the budget and then play with the concept. So once in a while we start doing that, it just everything start flowing, because when you find the right idea or the right thing, it's just incredible because you feel they have to happen. And then inclusive, you start creating different options, different prototypes, different models. That's we on the end us do it because we present different options, and then there's say, well, I love this, I prefer this with that. It's more expensive, but let's go, let's do it. It's better for the client. It's better for everything.
Only once the concept has been approved do you start to move forward into the detailed design phase and then the fabrication and installation phase. The detailed design is where you actually show down to the little nitty-gritty of all the screws, bolts, the pennies that you're going to spend in the budget. It's going to show how you're going to make that concept a reality. The detailed design phase is by far the most onerous phase of a public art project, particularly if your work has any complications by being three-dimensional, requiring stands, electrical, any digging, any of those kind of permit-based things. It gets a lot more complicated and you're going to need some support. But the detailed design phase is really important, particularly when you're thinking about the life cycle and the future planning for your artwork, because knowing how your artwork is made is how you're going to know how you have to care for it. So your detailed design has to be done before you move into fabrication, because if there's anything that can't go into the public realm or can't be used or can't be cared for the future, it needs to be changed in that detailed design before it's made.
Just follow all the steps, because, CATA provided such a really fantastic list of things that they wanted for the detailed design. And I always think about what if I was trying to describe this to my grandma or someone who has no understanding of what the art is, or even maybe the medium or how technology works or any of those things. How would I be able to walk them through step by step every little piece so that they could have an understanding of how this works and how it's put together and how to keep it safe and all of those details that are required in a detailed design review, and just like be overly detailed. Put in as much as possible. And, if you buy something off of Amazon, get the spec sheet off of Amazon that has all the information about what you bought and include it with the work, even if it's just screws or whatever, because then you have everything listed out and you can really expect the other person to understand what all those pieces are and how to keep them safe and keep them long lasting.
And it's so important to actually do this, not only for those who will own and take care of the piece. But it also shows the people that you want to work with in the future that you can be trusted to do these kinds of things, that the details are important to you as the artist. And that's so powerful. Like in any industry, again, I keep on referring to that any industry thing. It's who you know and the relationships you build. And as you have those opportunities to work with people, if you are able to deliver above and beyond, and they can trust that if something goes wrong, you're there, you can figure stuff out. When it comes to responsibilities, you're going above and beyond, and everything's crossed, like the T's and the I's are all dotted and crossed, then you can have those bigger projects. Because those bigger projects don't come unless people can trust you with the money, the time, the organization, everything that goes into just making the art. Even the fabricators, they need to know that you're easy to work with and they can trust you and you deliver upon what you promise them via the contracts, and that the contracts you actually understand as well. So again, details matter. It's the part that I hate the most, but sometimes I just have to compartmentalize and go step by step. Stop looking at it as a whole thing that you have to do. Rather, okay, step one, what is the details of the screws order? Okay, just do the grind and figure it out. And then work with Kata. Hey, I try my best. This is my first attempt. Push past the frustration and the confusion that I know I feel every time, and eventually it becomes easier. It really does. When you look at the whole spec sheet, it's like, well, I have to do all that. I just want to make the art. It comes with the job. It really does. And if you can do it, you can have a better time as an artist because the projects that are going to be available to you now become even more amazing.
When we get into step 4, implementation, this is where you're actually in the fabrication and installation phase. Some artists fabricate themselves. That means they make it themselves. Some artists hire people to fabricate. Either way, that fabrication gets done and then it gets installed in the ground. And you want to make sure that what is installed is as close to that concept and to the detailed design as possible. So each part of this is ensuring that we accurately know what is placed in the public realm. It is the public. It belongs to everyone, and we need to know what's there. All of this includes planning for the future, constant conversation that needs to be happening in the background. How are we going to take care of this piece once it's in the ground? How are we going to make sure that it lasts as long as possible? What are we going to need to do when it's removed? And artists, this is important for you too, not just for the community that's taking care of this piece. It's really important because you want your artwork to be represented in its best possible form for as long as possible, because that reflects on you and your practice over time. Once you've completed the fabrication and installation, so the artwork's been made, it's been put into the ground, there's a lot of documentation that needs to go into the final piece. And that's all of the reports on how the artwork was actually made and actually put into the ground, so that the people taking care of it into the future know how to fix it if there are any problems. How do they open the artwork to change the light bulb? Are there batteries that need to be replaced? What do we do with augmented reality over time as digital formats change? Who owns the online rights to things? These are all questions that need to be asked as a part of that process. This final documentation will include what we call a stewardship manual or maintenance manual, which answers all those questions. They're all things that should have been answered in the detailed design phase, so it's just kind of a natural follow through of that. We want to have life cycle agreements so that we know upfront what the intended life of an artwork is. You often hear stories where an artwork gets removed because it was damaged and the artist is surprised that that artwork has been removed. They thought it would be there forever. No art lasts forever, especially outside, especially in Calgary weather. So we have to plan for when an artwork is intended to live, and then plan for its removal and remediation after its life cycle is complete.
It's really important to have a sense of what the lifespan of the artwork should be right at the outset of the project, and then design the artwork to meet that lifespan. That's the best way to go about it, basically, is you're not necessarily always going to meet it, but if you do everything you can with that in mind and build to that lifespan in mind, then you're much more likely to have success. And choosing materials, choosing a site, making all of those decisions around design that could impact the longevity of the artwork.
We're going to touch a little bit on warranties. So all artworks are expected to have a 2-year warranty from the artist. So the artist is actually expected to guarantee their workmanship and craftsmanship for the first 2 years of lifespan. That's just in case something happens to the artwork due to poor fabrication. So artists, make sure when you work with a fabricator that you get that same warranty from your fabricator. So they too are covering the first 2 years of the artwork for its lifespan. A warranty doesn't include damage. So if the artwork happens to get vandalized, if there is some type of major tornado that blows through the town, those kind of things are not part of your warranty. That's just damage that needs to be dealt with in a separate life cycle and maintenance agreement component. Your warranty is protecting your work. It's protecting the community and helps them understand and have confidence that the work that you're providing them is going to last for that intended life cycle of the artwork. Celebration and evaluation is the final step of an artwork. And honestly, what happens is we get so excited about the idea, we get bogged down in the work of actually building it, we put it into the ground, we're like, whoo, it's done, and we walk away. It's not over just because it goes in the ground. And that's where the community engagement piece becomes really important, because suddenly within our city, something appears in the public realm that we hadn't seen before, and the community is curious. They had a lot of questions. They often want to meet the artist. They want to know about the journey. So celebrating the artwork once it goes into the ground is equally as important as any of the upfront work. You want to make sure that you share stories through your social media, put them in your newsletters, have an event, a little unveiling event where the people get to meet the artist and come out and learn more about the artwork. You want to do interaction with the artwork so that it stays alive through its lifespan in your community. That's part of that connection to the streets that we've been talking about, making sure that your artwork lives within the city that you're part of. The other part that nobody wants to do is evaluation. So you've celebrated your artwork is in the ground, but there were probably problems along the way. Art is fascinating that way. It brings up things we've never thought of before. Maybe there were processes that were a little difficult if it was your first time. You want to actually look at those things and say, what can we do better next time? And the more you evaluate each time you go through the process, the easier it's going to be each time you do a project. So they get better and better and smoother, and you can create more and more projects within your community. And don't forget, even though the project is over, it needs to be loved forever. A public artwork needs to be cared for. It needs to be taken care of, maintained, cleaned. It needs any graffiti removed, any vandalism fixed. All of those things that you put into your stewardship manual, you need to make sure that you actually do them to keep that artwork looking its best for as long as possible. Let's talk a little bit more about project management and these key approval checkpoints. So someone needs to oversee this process. A lot of times communities will hire an artist and assume that the artist is the one who oversees that process. But we have to remember that the artist in the art project is actually just one part of a larger process. And as we get more into the understanding of how a budget for public art works and how the management of it works, you'll start to see that the public art component exists here and the project as a whole exists here. Your project manager is going to ensure that all of those steps within the container of the best practice of public art are being followed along the way. And that includes that this oversight is consistent so that the goals that you set at the beginning continue to be the goals that are met by the end of the project.
I think one of the main things I realized was that there was a long process to follow, but it wasn't a very simple linear process. Like I had to be doing about 3 separate things at once that were all somewhat dependent on each other, and there really wasn't any way to make that simpler. I had to do this paperwork, but it was because of things that I hadn't thought of. Like I hadn't thought of what was going to happen to the mural in 5 years. I hadn't thought about who was responsible for repairing damage, what was going to happen at this point. And all of this was things that someone else had thought of, and I had to work through the paperwork and make sure the community association was on board and everyone had signed everything, and things like insurance. I had never thought of it. And it's a good thing when you've got people on ladders and paint volunteers with paint cans and that kind of thing.
Documentation is key. So, in that process with your public art team, you want to make sure that it's all written down and agreed upon, and that these checkpoints are actually approved along the way. So, make sure that you clarify, write it down, and continue to check in along the process to make sure that those goals are happening. These checkpoints and reminders bring us back to the original intent of the project so that as things happen, because public art can take a long time, sometimes it could take years to actually complete a project. Teams change, maybe some members shift along the way, perspectives start to change as time goes on, and maybe you need a reminder of what those ideas were that you had back at the beginning, because maybe the project has evolved. Maybe you even need to change the intention of the project. And those checkpoints will give you that opportunity to work as a team and go, hey, actually, this goal doesn't work anymore. Can we all agree together that we need to revise this goal, write it down so that the project continues to move forward in a good way? So all of these processes, you might enter into your process at any point in that circle. And once you enter into the process, you still need to make sure that you complete all of those steps no matter where you enter in. So does that make sense? You want to make sure that you have the room to adapt and change the process based on what the community needs, what the artist brings, how their funding comes to you. You will still want to make sure that you cover all those steps no matter what part of the process you start in. Every time something changes in your process, you have to make sure you circle back to the beginning and start each step over again. So if 2 years into your project, you go, oh, actually, this goal doesn't work anymore. The project has changed. The community has changed. We wanted to use this wall, but oh my goodness, they're going to tear down this building. What can we do instead? You have to go back to the beginning and revise together all of the work that you did just to make sure that you stay on track. There's a lot of circling, a lot of checking in, and that's part of the process that's going to help you work. Thank you for joining me for this high-level overview of the process flow. So I know that was a lot of information. Don't worry. Over the next few sessions, what we're going to do is go into each of those aspects and discuss them in a little bit more detail so that you have a deeper understanding of each of those steps along the process. In our next session, we're going to look at budget. I know it's money. Nobody really wants to talk about it, but it's one of the key factors of understanding your project. And there's some very specific ways that it works in public art. So I look forward to sharing more information about that with you. Coming soon.